Good afternoon. My name is Celia Lacayo, and I'm the Associate Director of Community Engagement, and I also teach in the African American Studies and Chicano Central American Studies Department. Today we have a real treat where we are going to feature the Political and Psychological Science Incubator with Efren Perez, who is a full professor here at UCLA in the Political Science and Psychology Department. What is amazing is that he not only has graduate students participate, but also undergraduate students. And we're going to hear about the amazing research that's being done there, as well as the experiences from each of those students. Hi, Efren. How are you today?
All right, how are you?
Great. So kick us off and tell us about these projects. And I know we'll also be hearing from your students.
Yes, so thank you for the invitation. So these projects essentially are emerging from an incubator called the Political and Psychological Science Incubator at UCLA, or PIPSI. And the idea here is to essentially build a farm team of talented graduate and undergraduate students. So one of the big sort of feathers in the cap for a place like UCLA and its undergraduates is that if you come to UCLA, you sort of leave with some pedigree, right? You went to a highly ranked public institution, but the place is so massive that it's really hard for talented undergraduate and graduate students to stand out, to be distinctive, to show off and refine their skills. And so the lab provides one avenue for these students to essentially learn the ins and outs of the research process. And so unlike doing research, say, for a faculty member where you are essentially doing their work in some shape or form, the incubator turns that a little bit on its head and essentially sees its mission as coaching a lot of these young students to become eventually top line researchers, whether that is in industry or whether that is in the academy, right? The main sort of mark is they're learning how to reason probabilistically about really tough social problems and bringing data to bear on a lot of those issues and hopefully provide some clarity. And so as an example of that, we have several projects going on, but I'm going to underline four of these. One of them is a recently published paper with four undergraduate co-authors at a flagship journal known as Political Psychology. And this was an idea that undergraduates in a course that I teach on experiments pitched to me. And I thought that the idea was intriguing enough that it was worth investing a little bit more time in refining the idea and testing it. So the idea behind the paper is essentially that when you look at Democrats and Republicans, each party differs in the extent to which it accommodates people of color or non-whites. And so Democrats are primarily comprised of white individuals in the US, but they share the party with a fairly large segment of African Americans, Latinos, Asian Americans, etc. And so what the paper argues is that that very structure of the Democratic Party can sometimes lead some white Democrats to essentially display the negative attitudes that their more conservative counterparts express toward people of color. And so we find evidence for this dynamic across two major public opinion surveys and then two experiments that the incubator funded. These were original data collections, and it was a 2-year process, but it recently came out to light in published form in that paper. Another project that is coming out of the incubator, this is a project with two of the graduate students on this recording today, is a paper that examines why some people of color express prejudiced attitudes toward African Americans, right? And so the idea here is that part of what is going on is that if you think of people of color being marginalized in some shape or form, Some members deal with that marginalization by trying to increase their sense of belonging in a higher status group. So for us, really what we're saying is that some minorities express anti-Black hostility as a way to fortify their new position as Americans in the US, right? And so this is a story that we've seen sort of fragments of in past immigration waves. But as far as we know, we're the first to really bore down on the psychology behind this. And so it's a very sort of paradoxical effect in the sense that what we're observing in about 4 studies is that Latino individuals essentially express hostility to African Americans as a way to try to distinguish themselves, right, as Americans. So we want to be American, and so that means we are not like Black people in the U.S. And that resentment, that prejudice, ends up vastly undercutting their support for a variety of policies that not only would presumably benefit African Americans, but would also benefit Latinos themselves, right? But this is sort of part of a dynamic that's coming online as you know, the country is starting to become more diverse. And so again, it's original thinking paired with original data to try to throw some light as to, you know, who and why among various non-white groups display these sort of negative attitudes. Another project that we have that the incubator is sponsoring, Allison, who is also on the project today, or on the call today. This is another project with about 4 undergraduate students. Very similar story to the first one I described. This was a project that a set of undergraduates pitched to me as part of a course requirement. And again, I thought the project had enough promise that it was worth the investment. So the idea here is, you know, what exactly explains why individuals who are minorities in the US, but who come from distinct groups with different histories, different demographics, different trajectories in the US, what explains when they're actually going to come together and support each other's causes? And so the idea here is that, you know, these different groups vary in all sorts of ways, but they also often share very similar forms of discrimination. And so in the case of Latinos and Asian Americans, you know, we often focus on the fact that Asian Americans, on average, are a sort of higher status groups, right? Many of them come with higher levels of education. Latinos don't. But the one thing that they do share is that individuals from both communities, in spite of being here for decades, are often still treated as never American enough, right? And so we ran 2 original experiments that we undertook. These were with Asian American and Latino adults, and they either read about the gradual decline in the extinction of giant tortoises, or they read about how this other group is also being marginalized as being insufficiently American. So Asian Americans read about Latinos, Latinos read about Asian Americans, and what we find is that exposure to that common experience of discrimination, it actually boosts a sense of solidarity among people of color, so they feel more unified. And then that has the consequence of increasing support, not only for policies that benefit your immediate group, but that benefit a group that you sometimes see as far different. So Asian Americans come to the rescue by expressing more support for policies that are specifically about undocumented Latino immigrants. And by extension, Latinos end up supporting policies for high-skilled immigration, which really, you know, they don't really have too much of a dog in that fight. The last project, and Ying is one of the undergraduates on this project, looks at how ideologies that political leaders use to manage diversity, what impact they have on a group that is as large and as heterogeneous and as growing as Latinos in the US. And so there's a variety of ways to manage America's racial and ethnic diversity. One of them is that we can essentially celebrate our differences, right? This is what's known as multiculturalism. Or we can remain mum about our differences and emphasize what sort of unites us as members of the same nation. This is what would be called color blindism. So we've run two original studies. We've been finding some sort of inconsistent trends in the data. And so right now we're in the process of figuring out whether that merits an additional data collection or whether our original sort of thinking was just a little bit off. But either way, the goal is to publish the work and enter it into the public record or the scientific record more appropriately. So now what I'll do is I'll have Will Scott Curtis. He's one of the undergraduates on the first paper that I mentioned about white Democrats' reactions to the diversity of their own party. He's actually one of the ones that is still here as an undergrad, so that means he got to witness the publication of the paper. Some of those other folks actually already graduated about a year ago.
So, like Dr. Perez said, I am still a student in undergrad here at UCLA. I'm graduating this quarter, but I started working with Dr. Perez my first quarter here because I'm a transfer student. I took his class in experiments. And like Dr. Perez said, the proposal that the students came up with for a research project was really promising. And Dr. Perez invited me to join the lab working on these studies. And primarily, I worked on the two experimental studies that looked at the influence of white identity on Democrats' racial fear of, specifically white Democrats' racial fears. One of the reasons that this study was so interesting, I think, was because the racial identity of white people in America is kind of a hole in the research. There isn't much research about white identity. And so this is kind of novel. Let's see, like I said, I worked mostly on designing and then analyzing the data from these experimental surveys, where we asked a set of Democrats and Republicans about their political identity and their racial identity, and then subjected them to some treatments about that were racially coded, that were supposed to elicit either economic or cultural racial fears, and then tracked their support for racial policies like immigration or legacy admissions to colleges. And basically we found that the Democrats who had the highest white identity scores were more likely to be in opposition to policies that were racially coded, like immigration. And so the implications of this for the Democratic Party are basically that white Democrats, who make up a plurality of the Democratic Party, could be basically roadblocking a lot of the priorities for Democrats of color, particularly Latinx Democrats, because of these racial fears.
Thank you, Will. So one of the things that Will highlighted in that very last part is essentially that the paper provides insight into why the Democratic Party has such a tough time going up to bat for policies that affect people of color, even though they are a big element in their ranks and steadfast supporters of the Democratic Party. And so, I can't say that we fell into this by accident, but it was actually nice to get some evidence into why mentally this is happening among a segment of the electoral map that you would think are natural allies for these kinds of initiatives. Next, what I'm going to do is introduce Bianca Vicuña and then Crystal Robertson, if you can go in order. But these are first co-authors, right, which is sort of a rarity in a paper that currently is being considered for publication at the flagship journal for political scientists. But they can tell you a little bit more about their experience with the project. But again, the whole goal of one of the goals of the incubator is to have, the experience of the affiliates yield some additional opportunities down the line, right? It's about strengthening their training and positioning them to essentially do more once they leave UCLA.
Hi, my name is Bianca Vicuña. I'm a fourth year political science PhD student. In terms of my experience working with Dr. Perez and my colleague Crystal Robertson on the project that examined the mechanisms that facilitate the anti-Blackness prejudice within the Latinx community, I want to say that I learned many different things. To begin with, I had the opportunity to sharpen my theory development, research design, data collection, and data analysis skills. I also had the opportunity to become more familiar with the review process of any publication. Specifically, I think I learned how to go about addressing the comments that reviewers have in order to improve my work. In terms of this project will also have very important effects on my development as a scholar. This is because I am close to finishing my PhD, and this project will serve as one of the pieces of evidence to show the work that I did while I was in grad school and the work that I can do when I become a professor at a research university. The project also gave me the opportunity to work with two wonderful researchers that I enjoy working with.
Thank you, Bianca.
Awesome. So, hello, my name is Crystal Robertson. I am a third year PhD student in political science. And through this experience, I learned a lot about the process of research. I think oftentimes in the past, because I often do experimental work, when I encountered failure, I just assumed my ideas were wrong or my methods were flawed. And this project, because we have a few studies, three, really showed me about the process of digging into why an experiment didn't work and how to go about troubleshooting. I really appreciated this opportunity in that way, and also for my own work, learning about the different facets of experimentation. I would say my big contribution to this project would more so be along the theory lens. I contributed the idea of thinking about intergroup relations and American identity and how that interacts with anti-Blackness. Yes, and I'm also appreciative to the incubator for allowing me to work on this opportunity and allowing me to be creative with research in a way that comes across as intuitive. So
Thank you. So one of the things that I think Bianca and Crystal both highlighted in their own ways is how much of the actual research enterprise in a social science is filled with trial and error, and I don't think we're honest enough about that as professional researchers. And the disclosure is actually quite important, mostly from the perspective of the folks that are being apprenticed, like Bianca and like Crystal, right? If you have a very unrealistic sense that every idea that you have is going to yield significant results on the first shot, you're going to be sorely disappointed, and that often can cascade into individuals becoming much more hesitant about imagining new ideas, new hypotheses to test. And so everything that they described is sort of by design in the incubator. You come aboard a project not with the goal that it's going to come out 100% correct, but rather that the good research that is worthy of being published in top journals can take a long time to develop, right? And so if you don't find evidence the first time around, then you go back to the drawing board or you build on what you found. And so their sort of insights, I think, really underline that one part about what the incubator is about, which is making the entire research process a bit more realistic and more accessible to individuals who are actually interested in some research career. The last two projects I'm gonna highlight just briefly. Um, uh, on one of them, we have Allison Ramos, who is on the recording today. She's also an undergraduate, and much like Will, who you heard from first, she was actually in charge of the undergraduate research team in the course that I teach for proposing an idea that really was about what explains when we might observe greater solidarity between various communities of color, and not just greater unity, but when does that unity actually have a political impact? And so I'll pass it over to Allison. But the one thing I will say that I was especially impressed by when she was part of that class is not only sort of her intellect and her enthusiasm for the project, but her ability to basically convince her team members that this was the way to go.
So, for my research experience, it was quite interesting, and I would say for people who have no research experience or methods training at all, taking PS 179 definitely is the course you should take, because when I came in there, and I remember I told Professor Perez, I was like, I had no idea like how to do RStudio. I had no idea like what even was like quantitative or qualitative methods. And so luckily Professor Perez provided us with like the syllabus on like what the research proposal has to contain. And also he was willing to give us like advice on like our ideas and help us mend them to become like a fully fleshed research question or like research idea to look into. And so I would definitely recommend that course to people who are definitely interested in research. And for sure, it was pretty difficult at times to like, especially because this was an online course, to work together in teams. And I recall that our teammates, I believe for the first like assignment, which was like the rough draft, we spent hours like working on it, and it wasn't exactly our best work. And so after that, we kind of came together as a team and tried to figure out what was wrong. And Professor Perez provided feedback on how we could have improved the paper, just kind of like you would do when you're trying to send a paper for review, and then you get feedback back on like what could be improved to submit it, or like if it's rejected, what was needed. And so we took the feedback and decided to improve on it and spent many hours and days trying to fix it together. But luckily we were able to learn more about how the research process goes, and we were able to gain a meaningful experience even though our paths differed. So like one of my colleagues wanted to go to law school, one of my colleagues was a sophomore, and now I think he's a junior. And so one of my other colleagues also graduated. So like we came from different ideas and backgrounds, but we knew we wanted to come together for this one project because it was meaningful to us as people who identify as either a racial or ethnic minority group. It definitely was meaningful for us to do research that contributed to our community, and especially to understand how we can all come together in a way just like we came together on this project, to understand also how other communities are able to come together on political issues. And so to kind of wrap this up really quickly, I would say that for anyone interested in research, you should definitely take Professor Perez's course, but also if you are afraid of like not having research experience, or if you're afraid of like being an imposter and like going in like as if you're trying to play catch up, it's okay. I went through that exact same experience, and trust me, like from what graduate students also told me, the feeling may never go away, but like at least you know you're doing meaningful experience, and that if you keep validating yourself and focusing on the positives rather than what you don't know, then you'll eventually no longer get that feeling over time, or you'll eventually just kind of learn to live with it.
Thank you, Allison. So, that experience maybe sounds a little bit stressful and trying, and I think it's built into the nature of the enterprise. I don't think it helped that it was during a pandemic. But, in hindsight, someone like Allison can now essentially say, I'm less intimidated by, taking a risk with an idea, because I know that it's not about, rejection of me per se, but actually encouragement to make the idea stronger. And so, the research enterprise, I think that for those individuals that are young, that engage it, if they basically tap out, that is, they disengage, it's usually because they don't understand that it comes with very long time horizons and that the entire enterprise is based on critical feedback. So the experience that Allison is describing is one where my expectation is to coach them through the actual experience of getting critical feedback on an idea that you thought was really, really, really good. And my general approach is it's good, it can be better, and this is how it could be better. And the test is essentially whether you rise up to the occasion. In Allison's case and in the case of the team that she was in, they did. What she didn't mention was that in that process, after they submit that initial proposal, they get feedback. The trick is whether they respond to the feedback. And the way we make it work in a quarter system, which is short in weeks, is between the research team, myself, and Bianca, who's actually the incubator's lab manager. We basically dig in, we get our hands dirty, and we try to give the idea legs. That is, we make it where we can yield one testable implication or two, and then we run the data or go collect the data, and then we figure out how far off the mark were we. The last project that I'll highlight, just to introduce Ying, one of the last affiliates that will speak today, is a project that looks at how ideologies about managing diversity in a society impact some of its most recent members of the polity. And so here, this is a project that looks at the effects of multiculturalism versus colorblindism on Latinos' self-perceptions and any consequences that might have for politics. Now, I will say a few things about Ying only because I knowing her, I doubt she'll sort of trumpet them herself, but this is someone whose background is essentially quite strong in economics, and she approached me about joining the incubator, and we put her on a few set of research tasks, and she clearly outperformed. And then research tasks became invitations to collaborate not only on the project that I just described, but she's also waiting in the wings for another project on a far different subject, but that she clearly has some growing expertise in. And so that's probably one of the more gratifying things about the incubator's role in sharpening the skills of undergraduates. You'd be surprised, so many times it's essentially just a matter of them getting the opportunity and getting the consistent mentorship and feedback to make that opportunity go from 0 to 100%. And so I'll let her speak to her own personal experiences and insights that she has gained from being an affiliate of the incubator. Ying, go ahead.
Hello, my name is Yingshen Chua. So as Professor Perez mentioned, I'm a third-year econ and psychology major here at UCLA. And the way I came into the incubator is really different from that of my peers and colleagues here. I actually joined the research incubator because I took Professor Perez's political psychology class at UCLA, so just a regular elective, and I really liked the content and I wanted to learn more. So I approached him about whether or not I could join the research incubator and be able to gain some firsthand research experience. And I think that one thing that I've really enjoyed thus far is the fact that I get to get hands-on experience working on quantitative data, survey methods, working with both stakeholders, liaising with them, as well as liaising with my peers. So a huge shout out to Hannah and Celine, because they were the two students part of the initial project, and they actually came up with the research idea together in the same class with Allison, so the political science 179 class. And from then on, I joined them after that. And I would say that It's definitely given me a better understanding of what goes on behind the research process, because in the past I used to think like it was a really scary thing as an undergraduate, and like it was like very foreign to me, but now I'm able to articulate more broadly what is like the different steps in the research process and whether or not I would want to go into that field in the future. And I will say that even if you don't want to do research or academia in the future, having that sort of research experience is really, really good, because you consume so many research papers, and like a lot of our policy is the product of so many of the research findings that we have. And I think that a lot of the background knowledge of how research is being conducted and what kinds of methods can be used to come up with these findings is really helpful as a research consumer, as like for your career, anything like that. So just in summary, I think that my time in the research incubator has really made my third year a lot better and has defined it very much, and I would recommend it to anyone who is interested.
Yeah, so with a lot of the undergrads, I of course, if they come into the incubator and they're made affiliates, to be honest, I'm hoping that they become quite interested in, a career in the social sciences. I'm not very particular about whether that's political science or psychology or sociology, etc. But the interest in getting them into the academy is largely because science sort of thrives from innovation, and you often get innovation when you have a heterogeneity in people's ideas and insights. I mean, one of the cool things about social science is that so much of it is based on essentially looking at the dots that construct the world and then making a connection between those dots to see if the patterns that you see are true or not. And so the more diversity you have collectively in a social science, that means more idea generation, right? More hypothesis generation. That means that we can basically cycle through plenty of ideas and then figure out what truly characterizes a given social reality or political reality. But inevitably, there's going to be some individuals that say, this was lovely learning about research, but I'd rather go sort of the private sector route. And the good thing is that the experience of being in the incubator still pays dividends if you follow that track. So one of the individuals that is not on the interview today, because he's actually working, is an individual who is actually a colleague of Will's, and he was on that first project I talk about. Now, this individual also had incredible data analytic skills that got sharper. His reasoning got sharper, but he decided that he wanted to take a break from school and that he wanted to work in industry. And so he's essentially using the same skill set that he sharpened while he was an affiliate of the incubator to open additional doors for himself while he figures out whether he does want to stay in industry or whether he wants to pursue more aggressively a career in academic research. And so for the incubator and for me, that's a goal met, right? Do you have a noticeable increase in the amount of skills that you came in with? So did you leave with more skills, with a richer experience? And generally speaking, although I haven't kept track, my sense is that people do, because I end up writing letters of recommendation for a lot of them after they leave the incubator. And from what I could tell, they're reaching really highly for a lot of these opportunities that come after graduating with your BA from UCLA.
Thank you so much, Efren and affiliates from the Political and Psychological Science Incubator. As you can see and hear, they're conducting amazing cutting-edge research that is needed in this time. And so this is Celia Lacayo with LA Social Science. Make sure to subscribe and visit us. And again, if you want to hear the most relevant and cutting-edge research, this is where it's at.